I walked into the bank that Tuesday morning thinking my biggest problem was a broken laptop. I only needed $330, just enough to get it repaired before I lost another client. If I couldn't finish the project by Friday, I'd miss my rent payment too. I had no backup plan. What I didn't know was that before I walked back out those glass doors, everything I believed about my father and my entire life would begin to unravel. I stood quietly in line, rehearsing excuses I would give my client if the repair took longer than expected. When my turn came, I smiled politely and slid my debit card across the counter. "I'd like to withdraw $330, please." The young teller nodded. "Of course, Mr. Wood." She inserted my card and began typing. Then, without warning, her fingers froze above the keyboard. She blinked twice at the screen, leaned closer, and all the color drained from her face. My heart slammed against my ribs. Is something wrong?" I asked. She looked at me, forcing a nervous smile that only made me more uneasy. "Sir," she whispered, lowering her voice, "could you please have a seat? Our branch manager would like to speak with you." My stomach dropped. "The manager? Why? Has someone stolen my money?" I'm sorry, I can't discuss it." Around me, people in line had begun to notice. An elderly man glanced over his newspaper. A woman waiting with her son looked at me with quiet curiosity. Every second felt heavier than the last. As I sat down, my mind spiraled into panic. Identity theft? Frozen account? Some mistake from years ago? I had never been in trouble with the law, yet I suddenly felt as though I were waiting for a verdict. 5 endless minutes later, a man in a navy suit stepped out of a glass office and called my name. "Mr. Oliver Wood?" I stood on shaky legs. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't reassuring either. It looked like he had news that was about to change someone's life forever. And somehow, that someone was me. The branch manager quietly closed the office door behind us. My pulse pounded so hard I could barely hear him. I was certain he was about to tell me my account had been hacked. Instead, he slowly turned his computer screen toward me. "Mr. Wood," he said, "before you look at this, I need you to understand that we have verified these records several times." I glanced at the balance and immediately shook my head. "No, that's not my account." The number on the screen read $3,486,912.44. I actually laughed, convinced someone had made a terrible mistake. "It belongs to another Oliver Wood." The manager calmly slid a folder across the desk. "The account is tied to your social security number and your late father, Thomas Wood." The room suddenly felt smaller. "My father died when I was 15, I whispered. "My mother always told me he left nothing but unpaid bills." "I understand," the manager replied softly, "but the documents tell a different story." He explained that Thomas had created an investment trust shortly before his death. Then, 25 years ago, during a records conversion, one filing error, a single incorrect digit, disconnected the trust from my identity. The money remained invested, growing year after year, while no one could legally release it. With trembling hands, I opened the oldest document in the folder. At the bottom was my father's unmistakable signature. Beneath it, one handwritten sentence stopped my heart. "Everything I couldn't give my son in life, I leave him here." My vision blurred with tears. For 26 years, I had believed my father had abandoned me. He hadn't. Someone had hidden the truth. The manager leaned forward and quietly added, "Mr. Wood, there's one more thing you need to know. Someone has spent decades trying to find you." I lifted my eyes. "Who?" I drove straight to my mother's house, the folder gripping my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. Every mile, one question echoed in my mind. If my father had left me this trust, why had no one ever told me? The moment Mom opened the door and saw the documents, her face turned pale. "Oliver," she whispered, "where did you get those?" "So you recognize them?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Tears filled her eyes before she slowly nodded. "I thought it was gone forever." We sat at the kitchen table, where I had done my homework as a boy. Through sobs, she confessed that after Dad's funeral, my Uncle Victor had taken control of everything. "He told me the trust couldn't be recovered," she said. "He said we'd waste years and every dollar we had chasing it. I believed him, and I was too broken to fight." Something inside me snapped. That evening, I drove to Victor's house. He opened the door wearing an expensive watch and greeted me with a smile that vanished the instant he saw the folder. "So," he muttered, You finally found it. You lied to us, I said. I spared your mother false hope. No, I fired back. You buried my father's last gift. Victor folded his arms without an ounce of regret. You have the money now, don't you? Why dig up the past? His coldness chilled me more than his words. As I turned to leave, he called after me. If I were you, Oliver, I wouldn't celebrate yet. The next morning, my phone rang. The bank's fraud department. Someone had formally challenged the inheritance. I didn't need to ask who. Victor wasn't finished with me. And for the first time, I realized that uncovering the truth was only the beginning of the fight. Before I could celebrate a single dollar, the inheritance was frozen. Victor's legal challenge had forced the bank to suspend the transfer until every document was verified. Just when I thought I'd found my father's final gift, it felt as though it was slipping through my fingers again. Then I met the one man who had refused to let that happen. Attorney Richard Adams was nearly 80. He greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake, then led me into an office lined with shelves overflowing with dusty binders. He pulled down one box marked wood. You've kept all of this? I asked in disbelief. For 26 years, he replied, because I gave your father my word. Inside were hundreds of letters, court filings, address updates, rejected applications, and handwritten notes. Every year, Richard had submitted new requests, refusing to let a single filing error erase Thomas Wood's last wish. My throat tightened. You never stopped. He smiled gently.
A promise doesn't expire because life gets difficult. Then he handed me a sealed envelope. Your father asked me to give you this, if we ever found you. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter. Oliver, if you're reading this, someone kept a promise I prayed would outlive me. Never measure a person's worth by what they own. Measure it by the promises they keep when no one is watching. The tears came before I could stop them. For the first time since my father died, I felt as though he was speaking directly to me. Richard quietly looked away, giving me a moment. Then my phone vibrated. The bank. Another legal objection had just been filed. Victor wasn't giving up. Neither was I. Because now I wasn't fighting for millions. I was fighting for my father's final promise. 3 months later, the judge's decision finally ended the fight. Every document Richard Adams had preserved, every letter my father had signed, and every update he had filed over the years proved the same thing. My father had never abandoned me. Victor's claims collapsed one by one, and his final appeal was dismissed. As we stepped out of the courthouse, Richard smiled. It's over, Oliver. I looked up at the sky and whispered, Dad, we did it. But here's the part that may surprise you the most. The first thing I bought wasn't a mansion or an exotic vacation. I paid every debt I owed. I repaired the laptop that had brought me to the bank that unforgettable morning. Then I bought a modest home, made sure my mother would never worry about another bill again, and created financial support for my cousins so they could build better futures than ours. One promise had changed an entire family. A week later, I invited Richard to a classic car show. He stopped in front of a beautifully restored 1966 Ford Mustang and quietly said, Your father always dreamed of owning one. I smiled and handed him the keys. It's yours. He stared at me, speechless. I can't accept this. You already did, I replied. The day you kept your promise to my father. Tears filled his eyes. As I watched him drive away, I finally understood the greatest inheritance wasn't 3.4 million. It was my father's love, protected for decades by one honest man who refused to break his word. So let me ask you one question. If someone made a promise to protect your future, would they still keep it 26 years later? Sometimes an ordinary trip to the bank doesn't change your finances. It changes your heart forever.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.